Hey guys, Kevin Cleary here with a knife video. Today I have a few budget blades for you. We're going to specifically focus on the H6 Elegance from RealSteel, but I've got all of these other knives here along with it so that I can kind of do a compare discussion type of video about this rather than just a straight review since this knife has been out for a little while, and since I wanted to bring in some other ideas anyway when I was planning the review. So let's go ahead and get started. By way of introduction, I should point out that RealSteel is doing a great job in terms of just their quality and their designs, and secondly, that their price points are pretty, or generally speaking, pretty moderate. So it's nice to see a company that's giving us new knives, well-built knives, and knives that are coming in at a very affordable or reasonably affordable price point. Now I will say this, if you're watching in Canada, some of these knives are a little overpriced at Canadian retailers. I'm not sure why, but it's probably worth your while to look around and maybe even import some of these from our neighbors to the south rather than pay the extra that you have to pay to buy from a Canadian retailer. That's not always the case, but for some reason RealSteels seem to be a little pricey here. Anyway, let's move on to the knife we actually want to focus on, and I'm going to move a couple of these out of the way. They'll be coming back in a second. This, of course, is the RealSteel H6 that was originally released. It was a hollow ground 14C28N blade. It came in satin or this black coating. I ended up with the black coating, so there was no satin ones left. Nice finger choil there, pretty nice thumb ramp. I really like this knife. I like the ergonomics. I like the overall design of it. There have been a couple of other variations of this. There's a stainless steel frame lock version. There's a lockback version with a nail nick that's supposed to be a two-handed opening version for places where that's a legal requirement for your folding knife. And most recently they've come out with this version, which is called the Elegance. You've probably seen it in blue. It comes in blue and black, and I ended up with the black one, sort of a stonewash finish on the blade. And you can see that it's quite a different blade shape, right? They didn't just take this blade shape and go with a full flat grind. They really reworked the whole blade shape overall. And so because of that, this is a fairly different knife. And even if you look at the handle shape side by side, you can see even the handle shape seems a little different. Of course, this one's the flat G10 and this is contoured, so that itself is different. Both of them do have a lot of similarities though. They both got the back spacer, they're both liner locks. The footprint is fairly similar outside of the blade, similar length. You do get a little more cutting edge, kind of, if that makes sense. Sorry, let's bring these down where you can see the blades. You do get a little more cutting edge. You can kind of see that there because of that finger choil with the Elegance. I didn't realize when I first said that the blades weren't in frame. So there are some differences, and so I want to kind of go through these. This knife has always reminded me of the Rat Model 1, which is why I've got the Model 1 folders here. Okay, so now that we've kind of given you some of the basic differences, let's kind of work through these blades the way we normally do and just talk about the different things that are going on, starting with the blade. So I will say the blade on these two, of course, is the same shape, but this one is D2, and there are a number of Rat Model 1s available now in D2, different colors and stuff like that. This happens to be the Peel and Ply carbon fiber, which is pretty nice, but not for everyone probably. There'll be some of you who really want, you know, a bright orange or yellow or something like that, and there are a number of colors available in this one. Same is true of this and this and this. Okay, so blade shape is where we're going to start though, and just kind of work through that. So the biggest difference, of course, is the original H6, which has a hollow ground blade. Now, I really like hollow ground blades. I know not everyone is as big a fan as I am, and I've got quite a lot of use on this knife, and it has performed really well for me. It's 14C28N steel, which is a big upgrade from this, from the AUS 8, and I would actually say that the AUS 8 on the Rat 1 is a softer AUS 8. So you may have had AUS 8 from other places and thought it's pretty good, and it is fine. It's perfectly workable steel. but the Rat 1 tends to be a little soft, okay? I've heard the same thing about the D2, although I've got to say this one has held an edge really well for me. So although I've heard people suggest that it's not as hard as it could be, that has not been my experience. Now, I don't have a testing lab, so I can't go and give you an actual Rockwell hardness on this other than the one that they suggest. You know what I mean? I can't tell you anything other than experience. Now, my experience with the 14C28N has been very, very good. Generally speaking, it's not equal to D2, but in these knives, haven't noticed a big difference, okay? So that's our discussion of steel. Now, size on these, you can see, is very, very close, but the H6, now you can see those two side by side, and the same would be true if we had these two side by side. The H6 does give you a little bit better handle to blade ratio. So you've got a shorter handle here, but the blade length is the same. And in fact, on this one, the cutting edge is a little different. See, if I hold these, at the start of the cutting edge for both, you can see that I'm getting a bit more cutting edge on the H6 Elegance, which is something I really appreciate. So when it comes to blade steel and blade performance, on paper, I would say D2 is definitely a better steel than 14C28N. However, in practice, these perform really, really well. Now, the edge holding is very, very good. And I did go ahead and measure all of these before. And behind the edge, they're all around 20 thousandths, which is pretty darn thin and going to perform really, really nicely for you. Now, one difference I want to point out before we leave the blade is take a look at this. There we go. On the Elegance, the blade steel is fairly thick, thicker than any of the others, right? So hopefully you can be able to see that there. So you are getting a thicker blade stock that is just then ground down to a thinner point. Now, the other thing I want to point out here is notice the distal taper on this does come to a pretty fine point. And if we compare the Rat 1, there's a little more steel here. It's not quite as much of a taper, so it's going to be a slightly more robust tip. The other thing you have to think about is what kind of cutting tasks you do and what kind of blade profile you prefer. These are all quite different. Right here, you've got quite a bit of belly, and I really do like this for, a lot of different cutting tasks, especially any kind of task where you're doing long slicing cuts. That belly is going to be really, really helpful. On this one, you almost have, it's kind of a Wharncliffe blade shape. It does work really well if you're cutting on a surface, because see how it kind of moves up in this direction? That means if you had a flat surface here that you're going to work on, this blade shape nicely kind of moves the handle and your fingers out of the way so you can cut really nicely on a surface. So I do really appreciate that about the blade shape on the H6. And again, the Rat 1, a little more belly. Of course, it's a more pronounced belly, which is something we're used to seeing in sort of outdoor use blades, and that is the sort of origin of this knife, even though I know it's a great and very well loved EDC blade. Okay, so that's my discussion of blade shape. Which one do I prefer? Which one do you prefer? Well, I do kind of prefer or lean toward the hollow ground H6. But having said that, I don't really favor one of these in terms of carrying one more than all the others, okay? The reality is they're all great knives and they all perform really, really well for the stuff that I need to do. And I'm not gonna, to me, it wouldn't feel right to really say that I, find one performs so much better than the others that I just always favor it. All right, so moving on, let's talk a little about lockup and deployment. And on lockup and deployment, these are all really, really good, okay? Now, the one difference I would say that I like about the H6 is that the steel liners are a little bit thicker. It's not a ton thicker, but they're a little bit thicker. They are, however, when we're talking about Actually, forget that for now. They are a little bit thicker, which is going to provide a little bit of strength. None of them have a relief cut, which I do appreciate. I don't like relief cuts in my liner locks because I just don't feel it's necessary, and I think it does reduce the strength on them just a little bit. And all of these are really, really smooth. These knives, you know, every one of them flicks out really nicely. Every one of them is rock solid in terms of up and down and side to side blade play. Every one of them has a nice detent. Now the geometry is noticeably different on the Rat 1. So notice here's the pivot, here's the screw, or I mean here's the thumb stud, here's the pivot, here's the thumb stud, and one more, here's the pivot, here's the thumb stud. Now notice there's a little bit more distance from here to here than there is from here to here. That does mean you can kind of get, you can almost preload your flip on this. So I can push straight up a little bit and add a little bit of force and then move my thumb just a bit to the side and it forces it out with a lot of authority. You can't quite do that as easily with these. You can, but it doesn't work quite as well. All right. Now in terms of smoothness, all of these are really, really smooth. And you know, that's just a testament to the quality of all of them, and I'm not really going to call one any better than the others. All right, let's now move on to the handle, and I have both a, let's say this, I have something I prefer about each one. So the H6, my biggest complaint about the handle is the backspacer. I think it looks really cool. That geared backspacer is nice looking. But if they did these with post-construction like this, I think it would be a lot better. It would lighten them up quite a bit, and it would make them nice and easy to clean. The Rat 1 is the lightest of these at 5.3 ounces. Now this is actually heavier. This is the lightest, 4.9 ounces on the standard version of the Rat Model 1. And so if you went with the standard FRN scales and the D2 steel, you'd get the lightest option at 4.9 ounces. This one is 5.3 ounces. This guy is 5.1 ounces, and this guy is 5.6 ounces. It's the heaviest out of them all. And that's because of the contoured G10. You know, you're adding a little bit of material there. You've also got more blade material as well. These two are really so close that it doesn't matter. And honestly, at 5.6 ounces, you know, none of these I find to be overly heavy, although they are all a little heavy for their size. You know, you can find knives at 8.5 inches that are you know, between 4 and 5 ounces rather than over 5 ounces, which all of these are. So handle construction, I like the pillar construction on this one rather than the backspacer construction. But on these, I'm really impressed that these are milled out. Both of these are, but the Rat 1 is not. And this is something a lot of people have commented on. I won't be the first to say that. It is nice, and I would like to, many times I've considered taking this apart and, you know, taking it to a drill press and just drilling some holes to remove some of the material from those liners. Haven't actually done it yet, just because it's one of those things when you have a bunch of knives, you know, making one just perfect for you isn't really necessary because you're not carrying it every single day anyway. You're going through a rotation. So that's my take on the handle construction. Now let's talk about the ergonomics. All of these are very comfortable, okay? This one, you know, locks into your hand really nicely. The jimping is functional. It does give you that option to choke up, which I like. This one, again, locks into your hand really well. Now, because of the textured G10, it's definitely grippier than the Rat 1. Is it more comfortable? Is it better for hard use cutting? I don't really think so. Both of these are pretty well equally comfortable in hand. Now you do notice a difference when you switch to the H6 or to the standard H6. The contoured G10 is really, really comfortable, and I don't need to tell you guys, you probably know what I'm going to say already. I love that finger choil that is missing from this one and this one, although the Rat 1, you can kind of choke up and put your finger here, okay? And I think that's the biggest difference between the Elegance and the other two here. Is just an ergonomic difference. There's no way you're choking up on this knife. I don't have a problem with that. but it is something you kind of lose, okay? It's my preference is to have that option to choke up with the finger choil. So in some ways, in terms of ergonomics, I prefer this one over these two. In practice, and again, that's in theory, in practice, I really like them all, and I find them all very, very comfortable. One last thing, and that is to talk about lanyard. On here, we have tubed lanyards all the way around. The other thing that we should talk about is pocket clip. All of these pocket clips are very good, very functional, and I have no complaint other than to say I'm not crazy about the styling of these pocket clips. I'm just not. You know, even if they're very functional and they're just kind of there. They're nice and deep carry, which I think is good. I just don't love the way they look, okay? And so, you know, how much can you complain about strictly looks? You know, not that much, honestly, because the main thing that you guys care about as viewers, maybe you don't like the look of them either, but really, do they work or do they not work? And the reality is they all work really, really well. These are deeper carry than this, and so I think that's a win. However, these are only tip up, or I mean, only right hand tip up or tip down carry. There's no option to switch your clip to the other side. On the Rat 1, of course, everyone knows this. They have the option for all 4 positions, so there's no way you can, you know, pick a place for the pocket clip that isn't available. It's just wherever you want to put it, it goes, right? So there is that to consider. Now, overall, do I have a recommendation for one above all of the others? Well, I kind of do and I kind of don't, okay? There are things I really like about the H6, and I would absolutely say if you don't have one and you want to try one, you will not be disappointed. You will not regret it. They're really, really great knives. But guess what I would say about the Rat 1? The same thing. If you don't have one and you feel like you should get one, don't hesitate. They're great, great knives. The one thing I would say is these guys, at least they were, and I can't promise that they still are, but they were a little cheaper. Now, the D2 Rat 1s on Blade HQ cost a little bit more, and so now, when we consider price, it kind of is a weird thing. When these first came out on KnifeWorks, they were like $32 for D2 steel. That is a better price than you can get the H6s for. Now that the other places have started carrying these, and I'm not even sure if KnifeWorks has any, go ahead and comment below if you want to check on that. Now, these might cost a little more than these, and so that kind of balances it out as well. By the way, one other thing to consider that I haven't mentioned, to me it makes no difference. It really doesn't. D2, of course, is not a stainless steel. So if you really, really want a stainless steel, you got to go with the H6 or the Osate version of the Rat 1, but then you're sacrificing the performance on the steel a little bit. Okay, so there you go, guys. I hope that was helpful to you. As I say, it's really, really tough to give you a solid answer in terms of which one is better. These are all great knives, and at this point, I have to say that I think these two options, and I don't know how you okay, I know these are the same model, but these options are really about the best things that I know of in terms of budget folders. There's nothing out there that I would really say beats them or that should be preferred over them unless you don't like the size. And then there's, I guess, the Rat Model 2. But if you don't have these knives and you like budget knives, I really think you're missing out. These are worth checking out. They're very well made. They're very practical, very functional. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we will talk to you soon.